Okay, today's November 4th, 2011. We're on lesson 4.2, which is page 206 in your textbook. Today we're going to do completing the square, okay? So make sure we have this down. Completing the square. Okay? And what that is going from standard form to vertex form. So the other day we went from vertex form to standard form by expanding, and we also went from standard form to factored form. Today we're going to learn going from standard to vertex, which is a little more difficult of a process, okay? So we have this equation, and we are in standard form. If you guys remember, our standard form relates to a times x squared plus b at x plus c. Okay, in order to move to vertex form, the very first thing I want to do is I want to take my a term. So, like we were saying before, we want to take our a value here. Right now it is the number -2. Okay, so here's our a value, our b, and our c. We want to divide the first two terms of the trinomial. So this is a trinomial. It has 3 terms, 1, 2, 3. We want to divide the first 2 terms by whatever a is. Okay? In other words, we're trying to remove it so that it's just x squared. We're trying to make a 1, essentially. Okay? So I'm just going to draw a little. We're going to be, those 2 terms are what we're going to be dividing by. So, we're dividing the first term and the second term by -2. This is common factoring. We've done this before. We're taking -2 out, and we're leaving inside the brackets whatever it's divided by. So -2x squared divided by -2 is just x squared. And that's the whole point. We're trying to create an x squared. Positive 16x divided by -2 is -8x. Okay? And brackets, and then we have still +1 on the outside. So we've dealt with the beginning of this, okay? Okay, so now what we have is essentially a new b value, okay? Our b value is now -8. You need to take that b value, and we're going to do this as a side calculation, okay? What we're going to do with that b value, whatever it is we're going to divide it by 2 and square it, okay? That's going to give us a new number we're going to put into the bracket. So in our instance, our b value is -8. So we're putting -8 divided by 2, and then I'm going to square that. -8 divided by 2 is -4. -4 squared is 16. So we're working with the number 16. The reason I have this number is I'm going to add and subtract this number inside the brackets. Now, I want you to pay attention to this. If I were to add 16 and subtract 16, what is that essentially? What am I adding to the equation? 0. So I'm not changing the equation at all. But I'm doing this to make it easier for me to factor. Okay? So, let's rewrite our equation so far. Put it all in black. So we had -2x squared minus 8x plus 1. The next step is that number 16 I found. I'm going to add and subtract it to the equation. So I'm going to move these over just a little. Okay. I need a little more room. Okay. So in our next line, we still have -2 on the outside, x squared minus 8x. That number 16 that we were talking about, I'm going to add 16 and subtract 16 from the bracket. And we still have +1 on the outside. So the only change from this line to this line is I added and subtracted 16. And just like I said down here, it's like not changing the equation at all because it's like only putting in a 0. And adding a 0 won't change anything. Okay, so now I have these numbers inside the brackets. What I actually need to do is I need to remove the negative one. So our negative 16, I need to actually bring it outside of the brackets. But when I do that, don't forget we have the number negative 2. Technically supposed to be distributed to all these terms in the brackets. So if I'm going to bring negative 16 out, I actually have to multiply it by the common factor, which is negative 2 in this instance. So in our next line, we have negative 2, x squared minus 8x. We're going to keep the positive number, so the positive 16 inside the brackets. Now outside the brackets, I took negative 16 and multiplied by negative 2. That gives me positive 32. And we still have plus 1. I'm going to quickly just collect like terms, so simplify a little. It's still going to be pretty much the same as on top. The only difference is we're going to actually add 32 and 1. So we get 33. Now, the reason I have done this, okay, this can now be factored, okay, into a perfect square. So what that means, if you use Tonani's method, you can do that. We would have 1 and 1, 116. But what I'm going to tell you, instead of actually trying the factoring, we created this factor. So I know that what I can do here is I can find the square roots of the first and last term and put them into one bracket. Okay? So, essentially what I'm saying here is I find the square root of x squared. I find the square root of 16. So I find the square root of the first number in the trinomial and the last number. The square root of x squared is what? X. Square root of 16 is 4. Then my final step is whatever sign is in front of our b value, I just bring that down. So because it was a negative, I bring down a negative. And finally, I put a squared on the outside of this bracket. Okay? I also bring down the rest, so I have negative 2 plus 33. And if you want, we're going to double check by factoring what I just did, just to prove it to you guys. But what I've done now is I've created vertex form. This is now vertex form. So in standard form, it wasn't very easy to tell where the vertex of my quadratic was going to be. But since I changed the form, I can easily tell where the vertex of the quadratic is going to be. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is going from this bracket here, okay, that bracket there, and what I did is, whoops, not quite what I want. I turned it into x minus 4 squared, okay? So we're going to talk about that. If I had, this will be our side calculation, x squared minus 8x plus 16. Okay, so we have what was in the brackets before. I'm going to factor that. Remember our method, we take our first term, 1 and 1, or 1x times 1x, and factors of our last term, 116, 2 and 8, and 4 and 4. We know the products need to add up to negative 8. I'm going to tell you right now very quickly that we're going to be using 4 and 4 and 1x and 1x. When I multiply them, I'm going to have 4 and 4, and they both need to be negative in order to add up to negative 8. So I'm going to have x minus 4 and x minus 4, which I can combine as one bracket of x minus 4 squared. So what I did is I quickly squared this bracket. I cheated. Because I created it, I was trying to create a factorable equation like this. I knew that if I just took the square root of the first and the last term, I could find this factored version much quicker than going through this entire process. If you did it that way, that's completely fine. But the whole point of this is because we're creating something where we can do it quickly. Okay? If you look at this, I just want to draw a comparison. If you guys notice, we went from standard form. Here was our a value. It's still negative 2. Our h value is our 4. And our k value is 33. So we went from standard form, which was here, to vertex form. That was the whole point of this. And the reason we'll do this is this: if they give us a standard form and they ask us to find maybe a maximum height or the vertex of a quadratic, it's much faster than putting it into factored form, then doing an r plus s divided by 2, axis of symmetry, then plugging it in. If you complete the square, we can find the vertex in a much faster way. Okay? All right, here's another question. It's the same idea. We're in standard form, and I want to put it into my vertex form. Okay? So the very first thing we have to do is we got to find our A value. We know it's 2. Okay? We have our A, B, and our C. I'm going to take my A value out of the first two terms. So these are the first two terms here, 2x and 3x. When I take 2 out, or I divide it by 2, each of these, 2 goes to the outside. We're creating an x squared. This is imperative. We're trying to create x squared. Technically, there's a 1 there, but we want just x squared. That's what's important. Now, if you notice our b term, this is not a greatest common factor. In fact, it's created a fraction for us. We're going to have negative 3 over 2x. You can put it as 1.5, but what's going to happen is farther down here, when we go to square root things, if you've rounded it all, you're not going to get the right answer. When you keep it as a fraction, you will get the right answer. Don't worry, we're going to go through this. If you want to make it 1.5, you know what? I'll do it on the side here. So we'll do 2 versions of this.
It could be like 0.6666667.
Negative 1.5x minus 7. Okay? So go through this in 2 different ways. Now remember what I told you. We have a new b term, which is negative 3 over 2 or negative 1.5. So we're going to take that b term, and we always divide it by 2 and square it, whatever the b term is. Okay? So this is where we start to run into a bit of trouble with our decimals. But of our fraction, I technically have 3 over 2 divided by 2 squared.
Wow.
A quick way to do this is just move this 2 to the bottom of the fraction. Okay? So in other words, what I'm going to have, I'm going to write or here. I'll have 3 over 2 times 2. Okay? Which is 3 over 4. And it's still squared. When I square this, I get 9 over 16. That is our new term. If I do it with 1.5, I would have 1.5 divided by 2, okay, squared. I'm going to equate that with the calculator here. 1.5 times 1.5 divided by 2 squared. I'm starting to work with some odd numbers. So, sorry, there's a few things I left out. This was supposed to be negative, but luckily once we square it, we're going to have a positive answer. Same with this here, and I think I typed that in the calculator wrong. So let's try this again. 1.5 divided by 2 squared, a little better, 5625. So we have 0.5625. Those there are the numbers. These are technically the same number that we're going to add and subtract to the equation. Okay, so after finding out our new term we're going to add and subtract, we take our equation from before, 2 times x squared minus 3 over 2x, and I'm going to add our 9 over 16, and I'm going to subtract 9 over 16 inside the brackets, minus 7. I'm going to do the same thing here, just with decimals. We have 2 is equal to x squared minus 1.5x. plus 0.5625. I don't know if I have room. Let me zoom in. Oh, I really don't think I have room for this. Let's try this again. Hold on. I'm going to squeeze it a little. Minus 1.5x plus 0.5625. Now that I've added and subtracted the numbers, remember I take the negative version of the number I've put in to the outside. Now when I take it to the outside, I have to multiply by whatever the common factor was. So in this case, it was 2. So when I take those numbers to the outside, I have to multiply them by 2. So with our fraction form, we have 2 times x squared minus 3 over 2x plus 9 over 16. Now when I multiply this, I don't really have a lot of room to show you here, but 9 over 16 times 2 over 1 is going to give me 18 over 16. Okay, so minus 18 over 16 minus 7. Let's keep this line going and separate these two equations. In our other equation, plus 0.5625. When I brought the negative one to the outside, this was negative, times 2, 1.125. So minus 1.125 minus 7. These are both right, just one's with decimal, one's with fraction. Whatever you're more comfortable with, please use it. Finally, the last thing I need to do here, remember, is I need to find the square root of the first and last term now inside the brackets. Okay? So, with our fractions, this will be relatively easy. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of 16 is 4. And I take whatever was in between, which was our negative sign. I bring it down and square it. Okay, so I quickly evaluated the other side. The square root of x squared was x, and the square root of 0.5625 was 0.75. Now, the one good thing about being in decimal form is our k value of the vertex form is going to be easy to evaluate. We're going to have a little trouble here because we're going to have to find a common denominator. Okay? So, we still have 2x minus 3 over 4 squared. Now, I need a common denominator of 16. So, I still have negative 18 over 16. I got to multiply 7 by 16. This is 112 over 16, so that I can subtract, because those are our fraction rules. We have to have a common denominator. While on the other side, I can use the calculator to quickly solve in decimal form exactly what my k value is. I'm going to have 1.125 negative minus 7, which will give us negative 8.125. So negative 8.125. So we're already in vertex form on that side. Just one extra step over here. We're going to get negative, is it 130? Yeah, negative 130 over 16. So for our vertex form, we have minus squared plus. Here's our a value, which is 2 in both of them. Our h value, which is 3 over 4, or 0.75. And our k value is negative 130 over 16, or negative 8.125. So we're now finally in vertex form. Oh, that's not that great to look at.